Okay, I think we're ready to start. Are you ready to start? Good. I was just worried that somebody would say no. It would be awkward. Excellent. So I'm Ade Oshineye. I'm going to be your developer advocate for the next 45 minutes. And we're going to be talking about Google Plus signing for web applications. I'm going to be trying to make this interesting for those of you who've already used our APIs. I'm going to be trying to show you how you can make this valuable, how you can make signing a valuable addition to what you're building. If you've been to any talks by me before, you'll know that I like questions during it. However, because this is being recorded, I'd like you to defer questions till the end, and please use the microphones so that it shows up for the recordings. Thank you. So let's talk about Google Plus signing, specifically web signing. But let's start with something else. Who here prefers knives to forks? Okay, who prefers forks to knives? Wow, there are a lot of people who like forks here. So who prefers the web to native apps? What about native apps to the web? It's a little more even here. The thing I'm trying to convey is that just like with knives and forks, we need the web and native apps. They work best together. And what we're trying to do with the signing features is based on this sort of thinking. Despite the fact that we need all of this stuff, we're Google, and we believe firmly that it all starts with the web. So even though users switch all the time, dozens of times a day between multiple different devices, and will continue the same user journey across multiple devices, it still starts with the web. The web is where people discover your site, your app, the thing you're building. The other thing we believe is that when it comes to building a social web app, social is not something you sprinkle on afterwards. It's not something you hack into an existing thing. It's not just, I put a button there, done. You've got to rethink how you're building your site. You've got to redesign it. You've got to think about how you make this valuable for your users. Now, who was here at last year's I/O? Excellent. So you may have seen this slide. It's OK. It can't hurt you. So in the past, we've talked a lot about the technology behind social, about identity. We've talked a lot about OAuth. Who here has fond memories of OAuth? Nobody. OK, who here found OAuth painful? Who here found OAuth was something that required you to be a rocket scientist to get stuff to work? So we're trying to fix that. We're trying to move to a world where things are simpler, where you don't need a lab coat to do social. We built a whole suite of client libraries and SDKs across all of the major languages, the major platforms, so that signing and other social features are very easy. We've built Quickstarts designed to get you up and running within 15 minutes so that you can build a very simple web app, add signing, understand what's possible, then go to your own real application and think about what's going to be best for your users in that context. The Google Plus platform has matured greatly since I was on this stage last year. We have a much wider range of features and a much wider range of platforms. We have a platform that's aware of the multi-device, multi-platform reality we all live in today. And I'm going to show you some examples, some of which are going to come from applications that have been built by partners who are out there, and some of which are going to come from this app. It's an instance of the demonstration application called Photo Hunt that we built. I shipped this publicly about 7 days ago, and it's had huge numbers of users. So let's start with how sign-in works and why sign-in. So at Google, we believe it's really important that the user gets one secure method of signing into our services so that the user is strongly encouraged to do things like use two-factor authentication. The thing is, two-factor authentication is the right thing for users in terms of security. But once they've signed in once, if every site they go to requires them to sign in, and then every site has to also implement two-factor authentication, life is really, really hard. So we're trying to say, can we make this something that other people can piggyback on, can take advantage of? So how do you do this? How do you actually take advantage of Google Plus signing? How do you start? Well, with everything we're doing, it starts with the API console. Who here has not seen the API console? Okay, we have a few. That's okay. So you can go to developers.google.com/console. It will redirect you to the more complicated URL. The very first thing you do is you create a project. That's easy enough. You choose which of the dozens of Google APIs you are going to enable. I'm biased, so I recommend Google Plus as the first place. So that having done that, as you can see, mine's called Ade's Photo Hunt. You then just choose your team. Now, if you're building an application, it's usually more than just you working on it. There are other people who need access to things. If you're building a large web application, you may have a large team. You may have iOS developers, Android developers, as well as you building the web stuff. So the API console provides you tools to do this. And then you populate the client IDs. One of the things people often miss about the way the API console works is you have the project, which has a project number. Then there are multiple client IDs. So your iOS app may have a client ID, your Android app may have a client ID, your web app may have a client ID, but they're all connected to that project, which means when later on we talk about some of the OAuth token stuff, we know they're all with the same project. So revocation on one revokes on all. If you've seen some of the talks by people like Seth and David Glazer, where they've been talking about cross-device single sign-on, and the notion that a user authenticates the service, not the app, a lot of that is based on the fact that we have client IDs for each of the different apps, but we know they're all attached to the project. And effectively, the project is the service. So, create a client ID. You can see the email address of my demo account. And you can see I was too lazy to put any graphics in. And then there's some OAuth stuff. So, in this case, I'm going to be using the JavaScript button. So I only need to specify the JavaScript origins. So this is the site the button's going to be on. Because we're going through the API console, and we're trying to set everything up, we take a look at the API traffic report. As you can see, my demo app has been massively successful. But this is where you would see the amount of traffic your site was sending to Google. And if you got massive amounts of traffic, you would basically be able to go here and be able to request more quota. Or if it's an API that requires billing, this is where this would happen. As you can see, my app has not had that problem. So one of the first questions you should ask before you start implementing sign-in is why? Why is this going to be valuable to the user? If you just put a sign-in button there, but then after the user signs in, nothing has changed, then it wasn't worth it. What makes this valuable is that the user signs in and they get something new, something different. So for example, you may store preferences, or you may let them discover other people they know who are using this, who are using your service. Implementing it is very easy. So that's what our standard Google Plus sign-in button looks like. We've moved very much to a model where we say for most people, most of the time, they just want to turn up, cut and paste the buttons in, and then get back to thinking about their web app and not about our infrastructure or our technologies or OAuth or OpenID or OpenID Connect or any of that menagerie of standards and technologies. So you cut and paste the JavaScript. This is going to asynchronously insert the JavaScript that's going to load our JavaScript file. You put in the button, because you've got to have the actual markup for the button. You don't have to use our button. We do have features that let you do custom rendering. And many of our partners have gone for subtle variations in our brand that fits in better with their sites. But for most people, you simply say, that's the button I want. Sign-in is the class. Our JavaScript will later on rewrite that page. You say the scopes you want. So that's a space-separated list of the scopes. You say you want to request visible actions. We'll talk about this later. But this is what gives you access to app activities. You put your client ID in. Now, I said client ID. It's important you put your client ID here, not your client secret. Obviously, nobody here would ever do that. And a callback, which we'll talk about later, you can put in a theme, and you can do some interesting stuff with cookie policy, which affects how we cache the JavaScript that's loaded. In your callback, after the user clicks the button, goes through our consent flow, I assume, has everybody here signed in with Google Plus at least once somewhere? OK, good. So after the signing flow, your JavaScript is going to get called. And then in that, you say, OK, the user just signed in. I have an access token for that user. I can make calls to Google's APIs on behalf of that user. Now, this is the point when you show the user some value. So just as a basic safe thing, you should reflect the user's identity back at them. So who did I just sign in as? Show me the photo, show me the name. If I've got if I'm signing in with multiple accounts, this is the step where you confirm that I've actually signed in with my proper account and not my corporate account or somebody else's account who's using my machine. In one of our quick starts, in this case the JavaScript quick start, we show you how you can do sign in Photo Hunt. That's how we reflect the user's identity back at them. We show the name and we show the photo. Because these are my profiles, I know that photo means it's my demo account. So I know, oh, okay, that's fine. And we also offer disconnect. One of the things that's really important with sign-in is the user can sign in and sign out of your service, but it can also connect and disconnect your service from Google. And it's important you offer the user the ability to disconnect your service from Google. And when they do that, it's important you delete the data they've given you through the Google Plus API. You can keep things like the profile ID and the email address, but for everything else, the user says they don't want to have anything to do with you anymore, you have to give up the data. So disconnect is very easy. You simply call the revoke endpoint, passing in the OAuth token you had in your JavaScript. And then you do whatever is necessary to make sure the user's data is no longer being stored by you. So client side is largely a matter of cutting and pasting code from our documentation, and then you have a JavaScript client that has an access token and can make calls to a wide range of Google APIs on behalf of the current user. Now, this access token is going to expire in 60 minutes, but you've decided to do this for a reason. If you want a longer engagement with the user, if you want perhaps to save the token so you can do more things in the future, you make a couple of relatively small changes. You use what we've called at various times the server-side flow, the hybrid flow, and the one-time code flow. Basically, what this does is the user signs in with the client-side button, get access token that's going to be used by the client side. We don't want you passing access tokens over insecure channels. If you've looked at the OAuth specs, you'll know that the tokens you have are bearer tokens. Anybody who has that token can act as you. So what we recommend instead is you get a code from us. So you have a transient code, you pass that to your server. This interesting thing about the code is it's only going to work for anybody who has your client's secret, which means they're you, basically. So your server then has the code, calls Google over a secure channel. We can ensure it's a secure channel because we own one end of it. And then after this, we say, yes, we know it's you, we verify it's you. Here's the access token and refresh token, which you then store. And now you can make offline calls on behalf of the user. So switching to this mode, because it's pretty much of adding these two lines to your button. So again, we've tried to go for something that's very, very simple. You obviously have to do some checks for things like cross-site request forgery, but it's still relatively easy. So the user signed up to your service. They've connected your service to Google. How do you customize the service? Well, you think about what's going on. The users turn up, they've brought their profile. This is my profile, my demo one. My demo one isn't especially popular. You can do a bunch of things now with the access you've got. So even if all you've asked for is access to their Google Plus account, you still have access to things like the user's profile. So you can look at that and extract perhaps their interests. So this almost unreadable screenshot is what it looks like when my demo account or any public user looks at my actual profile. There's a lot of data there about my interests, places I've worked, sites I have accounts to that I've linked to. So what you can do is you can look at this and you can do very simple things like term extraction, entity detection, and go, I now know what this user cares about. And this is all public data. So this is data the user felt comfortable sharing with you or with anybody else. You can do other things, for example. You could look at the social graph of people on your site, and when the user signed in, they gave you access to a subset of their social graph, and you can map them. And you can tell the user, here are 7 of your friends who are already on the site. So if you try a service like SoundCloud, for instance, that's what they do. Here are people you already know who are here. Again, this is all public data, or you've chosen to give them that subset of your social graph so they can do this. The other thing that's really important is that when the user signs in, that initial out-of-the-box experience should be magical. It should show them that it was worth signing in. If I sign in and nothing changes, well, why did I bother? The other thing that's really important is that when people get to your site and they think it's cool, they think it's good, they want to tell other people. Historically, the way that happened was they would share a link. So this is NPR, that's the fancy. And they would share a link, and implicitly, they'd be saying to people, here's a link, it's cool. That's it. There was no call to action. There was no thing that says, this is why this is worth reading. So what you see here is me saying, I really like this novel, I really like this umbrella. It doesn't say what you should do when you read this post. So we have a feature we call interactive posts. And basically what that does is it adds a call to action button. So if I'm sharing this article, I'm saying you should click on it. And when you land on their site, you'll be able to listen to the interview they did about Salman Rushdie's book. If you click on that, you can buy the umbrella. I strongly recommend the umbrella. It's kind of amazing. The point about interactive posts is that because they have this very distinctive call to action, for you as the developer of a site, you have a higher click-through rate. The important thing here is that you have the button and you have the link. So when we're looking at an interactive post, you can pre-fill the text in the comment, so you can put your message. Try not to make it something the user would feel uncomfortable with, because the user can just delete the comment. You can plus mention people in the user's social graph, or rather the subset of the user's social graph they've given you. Again, if you abuse this, they have control. They can always delete the people you're plus mentioning. But you can do some really nice, clever things with this. For example, you could plus mention people they know, or you could cross mention people. You could plus mention people they know who are very active in your site. Or if you wanted to boost re-engagement, you could plus mention people they know who aren't very active in your site. Or if you're being especially clever, you could have a post, in this case, about Midnight's Children. And because you've merged the social graphs, you could do something like plus mention a few users who are very active, that a user knows and is giving you consent to know about, and a few users who aren't very active. And now the user has a post with a conversation going on with a mix of people who are very engaged with your site, people who are not very engaged, and that will get them to re-engage. So you've got the comment box, you get the actual content link. If the user clicks on that, they get to your website. Then they have the button, the call to action button. They click on that. We strongly encourage you to have that be a distinctive action, so that when they click on this button versus the link, something different happens. So it might be, I click on this, when I land on the web page, music plays, because I already said I want to listen to the music or the sound of the recording. Or if I wanted to buy something, I click on buy. When I land on their site, the buy flow begins. The point is you make it distinctive, you make it meaningful, you make it valuable. And because this is all based on the same sharing functionality we've always had, it pulls in a snippet for things like the title and the image. And of course, the user always controls the audience, because not everybody I know would find Salman Rushdie's very, very long book interesting. And this way I get to share this with the right people. And for you as a publisher, having a user actively say, this is something I wish you people to listen to, or I wish you people to buy, is a much more powerful endorsement than you just writing it for yourself. So this kind of active sharing tends to be seen as more valuable by the user's friends and people in their circles. So implementing this is very easy. Like everything, you've got to go to your API project, you need your client ID, you load our JavaScript, just like with the button. You choose a label out of the 100 options. You then design and add your button. The important thing is the button you put on your site can be different to the button that's in the stream. The button that should be on your site should make sense within the context of your site, because you're trying to get the user to click on that button to begin the interactive posting process. And then the users in the stream will see a different button. Or, as you can see, looks just like the sign-in button. In fact, it inherits a lot of functionality from the sign-in button, including things like the class field at the top. So you specify content ID, you specify content URL. This is where the user clicks and goes through. You get a deep link ID. So does everybody know about deep links? Does anybody not know about deep links? OK, so the idea with a deep link is that when somebody clicks on a link, they get to your website and they arrive at a particular page. But wouldn't it be nice if they could click on a link that would take them to a particular context within your website or within your application? So if it's a mobile app. So what this means is I can be looking at specific context within a mobile app, share that to the stream, and when other people I know click on that, we can say, oh, this happened, maybe take it to the Play Store, maybe take it to the App Store, install the app, and then launch the app, and then send the app that context ID. And the app can say, oh, this is happening, and then take the new user to the same context the original user was looking at. So we have the content URL. It has its own deep link ID. They don't have to match because it's up to your app to interpret the deep link ID. So it's a 512 character identifier that's up to you to control. Client ID, cookie policy, you get to pre-fill the text. Again, you want to make this something the user is comfortable keeping, because otherwise they'll just delete it. Pick your call to action label. You put the URL, it's going to be behind the button. And again, if you want a deep link for that. So this is effective because it's a means for the user to do active sharing to the specific people they feel will care about that. And of course, if you want to plus mention people, there's a data-recipients field you can add as well. Now, one of the interesting things when you start out with a small app, as I did 7 days ago with my demo photo hunt, is that initially, there's nobody there. There's just you. And people say, hey, is Ade's photo hunt a ghost town? And initially it was. And so what happened was people turn up, they'd hit the microphone and say, is this thing on? Is anybody here? So how do you tell people, how do you surface the fact that there's activity in your site? How do you show the world that there's something going on here? So what we've been designing to help you is something we call app activities. The idea is that when something significant happens within your app for a signed-in user, and you decide what significant is, you write what we call an app activity or a moment to Google. So you write this thing that says, something interesting happened on this URL, and we store that. And in future, we'll find interesting and relevant places to surface that social context to people the user feels should have access. I think this is the important point. When the user signed in, they specified, you know what, I'm on SoundCloud. These are my music friends. I'm OK for my music friends to know what I do on SoundCloud. And everybody else will find it relevant. That's OK. So when these app activities get written to Google, you can see who has access to them. You can see when they were written. You can see the snippet that came with them. You can see the service that wrote them. And of course, you can always delete these. So what is an app activity really? Well, first thing is you have to have an app activity type, and we have 10 of them. Now, I could read the list of 10 to you, but I won't. But the point is we have a variety of different kinds of raw activities, some of which are very abstract, like add or create, and some of which are very specific, like listen or review. So this is saying the user did something, which is they added something to a collection, or they created something, or they reviewed something, or they commented on something, or they checked in on something. It's up to you, of course, to decide what that something is. So this something is the target of the activity. So this could be a URL, and then on that URL, we'll look in the page for microdata describing the item type, where the item type comes from the schema.org ontology. Or you can say the item type, the name, the description, and the image. If this sounds familiar, it's because it's exactly what we do with snippets in search and with snippets in the stream. So it's exactly the same technology we're using there. We made a couple of small tweaks, though. If you're designing this, you've chosen your app activity type, you've gone through schema.org, and you've said, actually, my site has music recordings, or my site has music playlists, or my site has creative works, or my site has hospitals or whatever is meaningful in your site. And you said this app activity happened there. It's important that the activities you write are going to be meaningful to the user, because if and when we choose to surface them, it'll be something like, somebody you know performed this activity at this entity, or 50 people you know did this, or 50,000 people listened to this sound on SoundCloud. So it's important you pick an entity type that will be meaningful to the user when they see it, that social context surface somewhere on Google. For example, with our recent search integration. So when we think about app activities, otherwise known as moments, it's important to understand that we have the basic type, where you have an activity with a target that is a URL of a page somewhere out there, and our user agent, what we call a snippet fetcher, will make a request for that, and then look at the markup. It's important to understand that a snippet fetcher we use for this, and for snippets in the stream, is not Googlebot, which means it has a documented user agent, and we're quite happy for you to detect that user agent and serve it just the microdata it needs. It makes debugging easier, it makes a lot of stuff much simpler. But there are lots of applications that just don't have URLs, or they have a very limited website, or they just have a website that was never designed to be parsed by a machine. So we also have what we call URL-less moments, where you basically extract out the item type, the name, the description, the image, and you put that in a JSON object, and you write that to Google. Of course, we also have an optional start date field. And again, what this does, it lets you decide if you want to write moments that are in the past or perhaps in the future. So for example, if I use a site that lets me book holidays, and it wants to write that app activity to Google, well, the start date isn't really the date I booked it. It might be the date in the future when I take the holiday. Or if I'm using a social location service that wants to write my historical check-ins, it would like all the check-ins to have the appropriate dates in the past, not now. So you can choose whether your activities take place in the past, the moment, but by default, they are now. So implementing this, again, is very easy. You've got your API project, your client ID for this, sign-in button, because if we don't know who the user is, then who did the app activity? And you have to ask something we call request visible actions. It basically is a scope that says, I would like to write these activities to Google. That way the user may say, actually, I don't want people finding out what I was listening to on this site because it's embarrassing, or because it's just not cool, and people think I'm cool. It's important that the moments you're inserting are meaningful. So here's some examples. So this is a really simple one that's actually on our site. So we maintain a URL with an example of a review of a widget, and you can write an add activity. As you can see, it's a type, a target, a URL. It's very simple. And then just basically write that as JSON to Google. And of course, we also support URL-less versions of this, where all of the information you would ordinarily have specified is put into that object and sent to us. The important thing to also notice here is there's an ID. It's up to you to specify the ID, because for us, it's an infinitely long string of set of blobs. We don't know what they are. How do we distinguish them from each other? Well, it's up to you, because you understand your data better than we do. So you specify an identifier for it. And here's both examples in Java. One of the reasons I like this is that it's one of the few places in the world where the Java example is more concise than JavaScript. So again, it's the standard type where you just specify, here's the URL, here's the version where we actually put all of the information in there. Okay, you've got signing, you've got active sharing, where the user is choosing to do something to tell a specified set of people. You have app activities, which give you a sort of passive sharing, where as the user does things that are meaningful, you choose to write those to Google, and then Google chooses to surface those to users when we think it's relevant and appropriate, rather than becoming spammy. So does all of this work? How do you know? Well, at Google, we think it's really important that you act on data rather than analytics, rather than anecdotes. So it's important that you understand the impact of the design changes you make. It's important you have insight into the integrations you've done with Google. So we have a feature we call Platform Insights, and it's a very simple idea. We have all of this activity going on your site, which because you have connected your service to Google, means we can tell which users are doing that, how many of them are doing that, when they're doing that. So we surface that in a tab on your Google Plus page. And that basically will show you things like, my demo app has been massively successful. I've had 90 users since 11th of May. I think I'm about ready to get some VC. So I can tell how many people signed in, but I can also do things like see how many of them actually made interactive posts, as well as how many of them did things that caused me to write an app activity. And of course, with the interactive posts, I can see what was the click-through rate. So doing this is fairly easy. You create a Google Plus page for your service, which is just very easy. Here's mine. It's not terribly pretty, but it works. You then go to your API console, and you put the identifier for your page in the API console. So in larger organizations, this means the social media people who run your page and the developers have to meet. You put that in, you hit request connection, and then on your Google Plus page, you get a section here that will basically say a project requested a connection. The simplest and easiest way of seeing this work in large companies is just to have the social media people and the developers come into a room, flip their laptops open, request connection, yes, accept, done. You could try and do it through email. So now you can see that my project number for my demo app is 53211, etc. And it's now connected to my Google Plus page, which means everybody who has management access to my Google Plus page can see the data about the effectiveness of the project, the web app. So create a page, connect the page and the API project, and you've got Platform Insights. The other thing, and the really important thing, is not just to say, oh, look how pretty these pictures are. It's to act upon them. So if you look at this, for example, you'll see that my app only really had activity on 2 days. And that's on the 2 days I posted and begged people to use it. So the action I would take from this is I should beg people to use this on a daily basis. But the point is you see this data, you perform some action, and then you see if the data changes. So you've got signing, you've got app activities, you've got sharing. How do you wrap all of this up in a bow? If there's one vision that sort of underlines everything we're doing at Google, it's this idea that we can connect all of Google's services together. You can, because the user has multiple Google services that they're using, you can connect them together and do something interesting with that. So for example, this is a French company called Jolly Cloud, and they have this rather nice idea that when you sign into their service, you can connect your Google+, your Drive, your YouTube, your Picasa. But instead of deciding for you, they ask the user, which one of these do you connect? The user clicks a bunch of checkboxes. They dynamically construct the scope string. You click Sign in with Google, and only the services you chose to be asked about were requested. The beauty of this is that they can use languages that make sense to their users, and then use that to control the scope of the request, rather than making it a OAuth level decision for the user. The point of all of this is that with signing, you can basically connect with your users, use unique Google Plus social features like the new approach we have to hashtags, communities, pages, and then create a unique and social experience that's valuable for your users. Thank you. So I think we have time for questions. Anybody have any questions? While waiting for Tantec to get up, I just pointed out, you can go to that short URL, and in about 20 minutes' time, it'll have all the links that are relevant to this presentation. We have a question.
Cool. Hi, it's Tantec from Mozilla. Quick question, and I was trying to pay attention to the APIs, but maybe I just missed it and I checked it online. Do you get a permalink back to the mentioned post on G+, on your site?
So if you make a post and the user chooses to share it through an interactive post, you do not get a permalink, because the user may choose to share that post to a set of people that you don't have access to.
Okay. But if they do choose to share it publicly,
if they choose to share it publicly, you can, because you've connected to their account, go through their stream, the public stream, and find that post as well, or use search. Basically, what we want to make sure is that if the user says, I trust you with my music circle, and then I see something really funny, and I share with my family circle because my brother recorded a song, you don't have access to that.
that totally makes sense. I'm just thinking about the public scenario where they do say, hey, I want to actually post this publicly. This is a great song.
So even with public, we don't treat that differently. You could still go and fetch that if you wanted to, but it's not something we do.
So you have to use some sort of heuristic to go find it? Like you can't be sure?
Correct. But if you've got a use case, please tell us. We'd be happy to look at it.
Okay. I guess the use case would be so that if the user comes back to your page, it's like, hey, you shared this. Do you want to go look at your post again? And you provide a link to it rather than like asking them to share it again and again and again every time they visit your page.
Okay, that sounds cool.
So that's the use case.
All right, we should talk about that afterwards.
Hi, I'm Meg. I'm with Fandango. We just did an integration with Google+.
Cool, thank you.
We did one activity so far, which is when someone watches a video or trailer, for example, we're writing that back to you.
I've used that. I watched the Iron Man 3 trailer on your site.
Oh, good. So have I, multiple times now. What I was wondering about for that app activity was we used Discover. Are you going to publish something that might be more relevant, like watch, in terms of the verb? I'm just wondering about.
So right now, we've got a limited set of 10 activities that we support. If people come to us and say we have a compelling use case for this, we would definitely be interested. And again, the sandbox is just downstairs. Everybody in the platform team is here. So come on down, we'll get a whiteboard and we'll look at what we could do with Discover.
Okay, thanks.
Hi. So you have a concept of disconnect that basically like cuts the application off from the user's Google account. Is there also a concept of logout, or is that just like token expiration?
So currently, right now, disconnect revokes the token. We don't really have a concept of logout that's public. We have a newish feature as part of our cross-device auth that lets you set a flag to say the user's logged out, but it's not explicit logout. But we're definitely looking at that.
Cool, thanks.
Hi, I have a question about this activities or moments. I mean, maybe you don't want to talk about the competition, but certainly I think you have to compare it to the Facebook Open Graph actions. So like how would you compare, I would say, like in which ways can these activities surface on Google? You just said like they surface on Google, like which would be the places in the stream, in the search, and
so right now, the only way we surface these activities is if it's one of the 6 launch partners of our search integration, we use to show the activity on that site. We show what the most popular activity is. But as time goes on, you could imagine all sorts of places across Google we could surface that. But of course, I'm not allowed to pre-announce features.
Okay, but basically it's like still in the beginning of this thing.
Yes, exactly.
Okay, thank you.
Hi. So you focused a lot on connecting G+ to your application. Do you have any hints or warnings about using G+ sign-in as the primary sign-in mechanism for your application?
So we'd be quite happy if you use G+ sign-in as a primary mechanism. But what a lot of our partners have done is they have a post-registration step where they say, hey, can you give us your email address? Or they ask for access to the user's email address so they can keep that. So if the user disconnects, they can reconnect later on. There are other services, for example, which after signing, force the user to create username and password. We've had a lot of, well, I've had some emails from users saying, why are they doing this? I already signed in. And we've also at the same time had developers say to us, I like doing that because it means if anything ever happens to the user's Google Plus account, they can still sign in. We've also had people say, well, the nice thing about multiple identity providers is you can connect all of them to the same underlying account on your service. And in fact, my colleague Ian did a talk just before me, talking about how you do that. So unless there are any more questions, I think that's the end of this. We'll be downstairs at the Google Plus Sandbox. We also have this really awesome GIF photo booth. I recommend you try it. It uses Google Plus features, and I built it, and I really like it. Otherwise, thank you very much.